Hello, welcome to the Clarendon Chronicles podcasts. My guest today is Marcus Beale. Marcus is an extraordinary leader operating in executive search at the highest level in the sector for many years. However, beyond his professional achievements, of which there are many, Marcus has a simply amazing story to tell. Outside of the commercial arena, Marcus has demonstrated remarkable determination and resilience by completing many ultra endurance events, at the same time raising substantial funding for his chosen charities. Perhaps the pinnacle of these achievements came in 2020 when Marcus completed the amazing feat of rowing solo 3,000 miles plus across the Atlantic in 48 days. Today, Marcus has generously joined me on the Clarendon Chronicles podcast to share with us his invaluable insights into leadership, perseverance, motivation, mental strength, success, and integrity. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today. What I know is a particularly busy time for you. I'm pretty much out of breath by reading all of those achievements in the intro, Marcus.
Jeremy, delighted to be here and great to see you again. And I was just thinking before for this call that actually it's a refreshing change to be this side of the table. Normally I'm the other side interviewing you, so it makes a nice change.
And I'm going to ask you about that later, actually, about what it is like on the other side, because we know as candidates, as we get into the executive search, what it's like. But it'd be interesting to see what you're thinking at the same time. So, but thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And lots to get through, as we said in the intro. And again, we've known each other professionally for a long time. In fact, I've been a candidate for you in search processes. Never really spoken too much about sort of the background of what's led you into where you are professionally and personally today. So could you give us a bit of background and what shaped you into doing all of those things that we talked about in the intro, Marcus?
Wow, there's a big question. So where to start? So I think it's probably fair to say I had a difficult childhood, a challenging upbringing. And I learned two things from that. One, that no one was coming to save me. And two, if I was going to make it work, I had to do it myself. And I think that really set the stall out for me throughout my life in terms of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to achieve. And I think I've been pretty successful at having a goal and achieving it, whether it's a work goal or whether it's an endurance event or something outside of that. But yeah, that's probably what's driven me, Jeremy.
Yeah. And going through the whole education and background process, university, I guess like many of us, you do that kind of reset thing around about coming out of university. If you're fortunate enough to go to university, what drove you into the kind of career that you've had? Because I did engineering at university and then went on to do something completely different.
I did the same. So I started off, in fact, I applied to do data processing and computer science. And very soon realized I didn't really like that very much at all. And I then moved into finance and then law. So I actually finished with a slightly different degree to the one I went in for. And then I joined KPMG and sort of learned to be an accountant. And what I discovered there really set me up for life. I loved working with people. Wasn't so hot on the numbers, if I'm honest. But I love working with people. I like solving complex problems for clients. And that's what I ended up doing. And that's pretty much what I do today.
So people-based industry. And again, for people like me, we think we know what goes on in executive search, but how does it operate practically, Marcus? So for all of the people watching this and on our, as you mentioned in the intro, Marcus, on our side of the table, we're used to doing the interview and the preparation. What are some of the secrets? Because you've operated at the most senior level in executive search for, what is it, 30 years now? 25, 30 years?
Feels longer, but yeah, 30 years.
What are some of the secrets to make executive search work? Because it's competitive. So how do you stand out?
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, there's two different methodologies for recruitment. There's recruitment and there's recruitment consultants who deliver recruitment solutions for their clients, and then there's search. And search is probably a broader term, and it's probably that which most people don't understand. It's not really a dark art. It's all about people. It's all about understanding the dynamics of relationships within organizations, what that business is looking to achieve, and then you build effectively a blueprint for what that looks like, and you go and find it. So experience is extremely useful when undertaking a search, but ostensibly it's a process not that dissimilar to like a strategic consulting engagement. In fact, quite a lot of people from strat consultancies, you know, the Bains, the McKinseys of this world, end up going into search.
When I think about it, it feels like there's an awful lot that can potentially go wrong, because you've got the intricacies and the whims of a client. And I know in your case, these are really big clients looking for really top quality people. And then you've got the people, like in my old exec background, on the other side of the table. And how do you balance those two together to get the right result for everybody?
Yeah, so I think the role of CFO's changed. I do CFO, and that's pretty much all I know, if I'm honest, Jeremy. But if you look at the CFO role, that's changed immeasurably in the 30 years I've been doing that. When I first started, it was primarily a numbers role, you know, good with financial information, good with spreadsheets, and that was the role. These days, it's very much a leader. It's all about collaboration, bringing other teams together. And so those are the dynamics you look for when you're hiring. It's interesting, actually. I'm in a couple of weeks' time, I'm part of the judging panel at the BAFTAs for the Global CFO Awards, the top 100 CFOs. And we were looking at the criteria in which we were going to assess them. And the CFO role has just changed immeasurably. So to come back to your point, you need to look at the dynamics that's going on with that organization, both its commercial dynamics and also the people dynamics. At the end of the day, people buy people. So the people dynamic, that indescribable culture, behavior piece, which is so critical in appointment, that really weighs the decision when you're making an appointment. They need to be qualified, they need to have the right experience, they need to have what I would call the right situationally relevant experience, and they need to have done similar things for similarly structured organizations, not necessarily the same sectors or domains, but it's all about the people interaction, how they interact with other people. For a CFO, it's very much the relationship with the CEO and also the relationship with the rest of the board, but that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for that dynamic, that interaction.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and I see that again going back to when I started as a CFO a long time ago. I would recognize the description that you gave there, and now when I'm coaching either existing or aspirational CFOs, it is completely different. It is absolutely, as you say, the partnership with the CEO, the partnership with the board and or external stakeholders, much more communication outwards. And when I'm working with particularly aspirational CFOs, it is about trying to help them get to the stage of thinking there's lots and lots of things you can do in the textbook. Going back to the early days, you described good with numbers, solid integrity, controls, procedures. A lot of that can be done by technology now. And your role is to do all of the things which are not in the textbook. So raising funding, working with demanding non-executive directors. And also the one thing I do say to people is nobody is going to praise you for delivering good news all of the time. So you better get used to delivering bad news as a CFO, and how you can deliver and share and solve bad news will really help you as in particular a CFO. And I have a 6-year-old grandson, and quite frankly, if you're above budget, cash is great, liquidity is great, and you've got a fantastic 3-year plan and you're smashing it, he's got a good chance of going to a board meeting and presenting that. And he's 6 in a week and a half's time. So I absolutely appreciate what you've said there around that. And how would you say your own personal leadership style has evolved over that period? And maybe how do you see other examples of leadership in other walks of life that that you can share with you? What makes a good leader? What's the approach, and how has it changed?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And I've seen appalling leadership style, and I've seen incredible leadership style. My only to talk about my own leadership style for a second, it's definitely evolved. Certainly when I was younger, and I've led teams from when I was KPMG onwards, really. My style was very much lead from the front, and in terms of developing a team, I was very good at developing people who were very similar to me. That's changed now, and I'm sort of have a much broader leadership, more inclusive leadership style. I've got a team now which is incredibly diverse in all possible senses of the world, and they gave me a lot of challenge, and I actually really embrace that challenge. And that the way I look at challenge is it's the sandpaper that sort of polishes ideas. So I might have a really good idea, but it's not well thought through. So by having challenge by the team, by those inside the team, outside the team, it really helps polish that idea and that strategy, and it becomes a much better piece of strategy going forward. So I would say my own leadership style has changed from being probably more of a dictator, working with people who are similar to me, to be much more inclusive and open-minded on where those ideas are coming from.
I think that's particularly relevant, and I'm smiling inwardly, because that was, I guess, one of the issues which I found quite difficult, in that in the early days, to surround yourself with people who are very similar to you is the easy way to do it. And then when the challenges get more demanding, you realize very quickly that actually you need lots and lots of skills around the table, whichever kind of table it would be, to get the best for your team and your organization. To really insightful, I think. Marcus, you touched on it to a certain extent, and I know sport is particularly important to you, and that cricket's my sport. I learned a lot about team building and how to embrace and get along with lots of different people from my own cricket teams in the early days. Yours, I believe, is rugby. So what's rugby taught you about leadership and team building that we can take from?
I think rugby's, I wouldn't say it's a unique sport, but it's different to many team sports. You've got quite a few players on the pitch, and often you're faced with much larger, sort of stronger individuals. So you have to have a plan how you're going to win and deliver results in that environment. And note that very, very few scenarios where you have sort of standout players who are able to change a game materially. I mean, there are some, it's certainly in international rugby, but at club level, that's pretty rare. So you have to work collectively as a team to overcome those challenges. And everyone has their role to play on the pitch. Whether it's tight head or a fullback, everyone has their role, and you all have to do your job. You have to do your job really, really well. It was really interesting. I've got two children, both at university now, and both elite, sports, men and women in their own right. Charlotte's England's netball, and Ben, I was fortunate enough to go and see him play in the World Rugby Championships in about 18 months ago in Thailand. And I tell you what, that was a real humbling lesson for me in leadership. He was at this. I remember he lost in the semi-final to New Zealand by one kick, and just seeing how those 17-year-olds handled themselves on the pitch. I mean, first of all, they all collectively faced the haka, which I would imagine is a pretty intimidating experience in itself, and they all handled that. Then they gave no quarter on the pitch and asked for none either on the pitch. It was bone crunching, that game. And you saw leaders created on the pitch, taking personal accountability for roles and decisions. And you could actually see leadership skills being created on that pitch. It was marvelous. And then ultimately, and this is what I love about rugby, to come back to your point, at the end of the game, it had been there's blood everywhere. It was bone crunching, this game, really, really brutal game. Both teams came together. They sat in a circle, all on one knee, and they talked about what they most admired about the other team, what they most respected, what they learned, and what they're going to take forward into the next game. That was a really humbling experience. Really humbling. In fact, I wrote an article about it and put it on LinkedIn, actually, because it moved me so much.
And these are lads at the age of what, 17, 18? at the
Yeah,
time?
I mean, they're big lads, but yeah, they're
Yeah.
lads.
And I know you didn't quite mention it there, but I do happen to know that you were quite good at rugby yourself, Mark. 'Cause I think you were at least semi-professional, if not professional, at
Well,
one point.
you flatter me, Jeremy, but it feels like a long time ago now.
Yeah. Yeah. I flatter myself by pretending I was semi good at cricket once back in the day. But you tend to play in cricket in the Yorkshire region where you and I both live, and in the Bradford League, you suddenly find out that you're not quite as good as I thought I was. But never mind. We move on. So rugby, sport, leadership, all very important to you. I think you've given some great insights. But it doesn't stop there for you, because you have an interest and a passion, not just for what I would call endurance. I mean, my endurance is fairly limited, I think, but you do ultra
Yeah,
endurance events, Marcus. And
yeah.
when we talk ultra events, ultra endurance, we mean ultra. So how did that develop?
Yeah, I was trying to work out before this call how that developed, and probably I found I was good at it, and I went for a run or went for a race, and I tried to work out how hard I could push myself.
Hmm.
And actually, one of the things I discovered about ultra events and ultra distance events is it's all mental. I mean, you have to be fit enough to compete, that's a given, but it's all about mental. Your body is screaming for you to stop. It's in, you're in quite a lot of discomfort slash pain, and you're desperate to stop. Your heart rate's like well above your maximum heart rate, and your body's just saying stop, stop. And you have to have this mental control over yourself to say, no, I'm not going to stop. In fact, I'm going to push it harder. And I found that ability to master your own, physiology, your own feelings, and just to push and push hard to achieve a result. I found that fascinating. And so I've just become hooked on it.
So that as a mindset, I mean, we're going to talk about perhaps the most obvious example that we mentioned in the intro, but you and I have both spoken about some of the other things which would completely blow other people away as well. I mean, leading up to that, what are some of the other things that you've done besides the solo Atlantic crossing?
Yeah, I mean, I've climbed quite a few big mountains. I've done a lot of Ironman races. I've done a lot of, in fact, last year this is for Movember, by the way. Last year I dragged my my mow around Namibia, did an ultra marathon across Namibia. So I used to do a lot of ultra marathon races. I've done a lot of very long distance swims. But yeah, probably the longest and most one that involved the most planning was definitely the Atlantic Road.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Atlantic Row. So I'm trying to picture in my mind the Beale household when you have a passion for your ultra endurance events. And when you mentioned there sort of the marathon, I'm assuming that's really long distances or multiple marathons over several days. I'm assuming something
Yeah.
like
So
that. Yeah.
Namibia was at 56. So the last day of a 5-day race, that was 56 miles on the last day, that type of thing.
Well, so I'm getting a picture here of what for you classes as ultra endurance. So take me into the Beale household, Marcus, then, if you would, and share with me how you go about challenging yourself and then discussing that with your family, because I'm assuming it has to be a bit of a team Beale event to be able to do this. How do
100%.
you go about doing that and getting the buy-in and getting support to do 3,000 miles solo rowing across the Atlantic?
Well, it helps having a very understanding wife. That's the first thing, which not everyone has. I'm very, very fortunate in that. But and to be honest, we always sat down as a family for dinner until the children went to university. Every evening, we sat down as a family. We talked about what was going on in each other's lives, and I really used to enjoy that time together. And I think one evening, I think I'd completed the Channel Swim, or it was the Marathon des Sables. I forget which, but I'd just come out of a race and I'd seen a race across the Atlantic, a rowing race called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And I saw some guys finish and I thought, oh, that's cool. I'm going to do that. and then I sort of sat down for dinner that evening and I said, I've decided to row across the Atlantic. And my wife went, okay. All right. Well, let's chat about that and how we make that happen. And my children barely flinched. They're, oh, that's cool, Dad. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Because they're used to that kind of thing. They think it's perfectly normal to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning, do a workout, have a full day's work, and then work out in the evening. They've grown up thinking that's perfectly normal. So that just doesn't faze them.
I noticed you dropped in there that you saw the channel, which you kind of skipped over quite quickly, actually, which again perhaps gives a bit of an insight into that mindset. So you mentioned earlier on, actually, Marcus, the physical side, you have to be extremely fit and able to do that. But if we can talk as an example about the solo rowing across the Atlantic, you've made your decision to do that, and I know you're doing it for charity as well. Can you give us that summary, few minutes worth of your tale of rowing across the Atlantic, which is what, nearly 50 days, and on your own, physically fit and able? And you talked before, Marcus, about that mindset to be able to do that. You're pushing yourself even harder. I'm sure many people have asked you to describe it before, but can you just take us through that for us mere mortals, what it's like rowing across the Atlantic on your own?
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, I have this outlook on all aspects of my life, because how I do anything is how I do everything. So I set out with a goal, and then I work backwards from that goal, set out structures and processes, and I stick to those processes. And the key to reaching any goal, as you'll know when you're coaching and mentoring individuals, is consistency and being very focused on those goals and what you want to deliver. So the first thing I did was work out, okay, when am I going to do the race? And then I worked backwards, worked out what skills I needed to learn. For instance, having a boat, spending hundreds of hours in that boat, knowing how to strip that boat, repair that boat in any circumstances, was important. So that was the basic skills. But essentially, you have to make a decision whether you're going to compete or you're going to complete. I made the decision I wanted to win that solo race, and I ended up beating most of the fleet, in fact, but most of the multi-crew boats. But I wanted to win that solo race. That was my decision. Unfortunately for me, I hadn't realised that a guy had entered the same year as me called Maktub, who was an Olympic silver medal rower. He was bigger than me, stronger than me. His boat was faster than mine. So, and I can talk you through how I ended up, because he should have won, how I managed to ultimately win despite that. But I made the decision I wanted to win. And so I put all the structures and processes in place to make sure I delivered that.
I'm almost completely blown away. And again, we're 20 minutes into the conversation. I don't think any of the listeners so far will be at all surprised that you chose to compete rather than complete in what you were doing. But this is the best part of 2 months on your own. And just were you a rower before you were doing this?
No, but I think genetics play a part. I learned to row in Leeds, in Roundhay Lake, if you know where Roundhay is. I learned to row there, and then they taught me the basics, and I kind of took it from there, really. But I remember getting on an erg. I'd been there for about 2 weeks, and I was pulling. I think they have a measure of power called functional threshold power, how many watts you can hold for an hour. I was pulling about 385 watts, which that probably means nothing to most of your listeners, but that's a ridiculous amount. I didn't know that was good. I was just pulling it. All of a sudden, people started crowding around the erg and going, "Oh my God, have you seen this guy?" Apparently it was quite special. But it's all about levers. Rowing's all about levers. It's about how efficient you are, what length your bones are, what length your joints are, and how efficient you are at rowing. Turns out my levers are quite, not as good as Maktub's. He was about 4 foot taller than me and much stronger, but my levers were pretty good, and I was a pretty decent rower.
So you've put yourself in the position of being able to do it, not just complete, but compete. Physically able, great genes, great capacity to be able to do that. Am I right in thinking that's kind of the easy bit? Yeah. Because you've then got 50, going back to your comment before around mindset, it's all about mental strength. How do you de-risk and cope and strategize to deal with, and you're genuinely on your own in this, aren't you? In
Yeah,
that
no,
there's
it's
just
unsupported.
you
So there's
on
no
a
support
boat.
modes or anything like
Yeah.
that. You're on your own. And you know, the training was good. I did about 4 hours a day most days. Some days I'll do a lot longer. Some days I'll take my boat out. I had a ocean rowing boat, obviously. I used to take that out for an entire weekend and just row for an entire weekend. So I used to, but I was doing a minimum of 4.5 hours training a day. So that's the sort of the minimum you need to do, and then you need to know your boat exceptionally well and how it works. But the mental piece is 90% mental. For an endurance event that long, it's 90% mental. And there was a thing that I had, what I call integrity, which a lot of people understand what integrity is. It's basically what you do when no one's watching. And I set myself, I was going to row 18 hours a day. I worked out if I worked 18 hours a day, rowed 18 hours a day every day, I put myself in a good chance of winning that race. And so that's what I decided to do. Now, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, obviously, and other rowers had their own idea about what they wanted to do, and I had to adapt. And there's an interesting story there I can share with you. But I woke up at 4 a.m. and I rowed till midnight every single day. I was in excruciating pain most days, and lots of days, you know, went south, and there was lots of challenges and lots of issues. And it would be very easy to have a lie in or get up at 5 or 4:30. But as soon as you do that, as soon as that creeps in, then that's when you know, for me, my integrity is compromised, and that's when things go wrong. So I had to set my stall out and stick to that pretty much every day.
And that gets you into the position of being able to compete to win with other people. I can't imagine what it was like. Was there anything about it that was what's the enjoyable part of it in all of these actually ultra endurance events? Because I mean, in my own small world, when I went back to university and started doing academic qualifications, I reminded myself I quite like the idea of going through a finishing line. So the achievements there on a much completely different scale, completely low level achievement, but I quite like the idea of achieving something. Is your enjoyment, is it the doing, the preparing, the completing, the winning? What is the most enjoyable part of it? And when you cross the finish line, how did you actually feel?
Not great. It's funny. It's when I was coming into Nelson's Bay, English Harbour, it was quite special because I was the first solo and I was ahead of most of the fleet, so it was a pretty special day. B, I was 3.5 days ahead of Maktub. I'd managed to break him psychologically and sort of get ahead of him, and it really was that. It was such a I don't know if you know what a J-class yacht is, but these are big, massive, multi-billion super yachts. There's only about 9 in the world. There were 5 there, and all 5 came and flanked me coming in, and all of them had their sort of horns blowing, and they're all these big, massive super yachts, and they were sort of flanking me as I came in, as I rode in. And then there were all the TV crews and so forth ready to interview me, and I didn't want to come in. I didn't want to come in. I wanted to see my family, but I didn't want to come in because it was the end of the adventure. And for me, it was a massive, you know, you're on a massive high, sort of preparing for something like this. Then you do it, and then there's a massive low following it always. And once it's over, it's over. And you've got to manage that low when you do some of these big events. During, I don't know if that's your experience, but for me, the pleasure is all in the journey. It's not actually achieving the destination.
Yeah, it is to a certain extent, I think, for me, and maybe others listening again, is if you have that kind of a mindset, I'm assuming that there has to be a what's next as well. So what can possibly top that in not just completing, as you say, this is, you know, it wasn't enough to complete. You actually competed, and you didn't just compete, you actually won with, I think, one of the fastest times ever
That was
across
a new
the
world record,
Atlantic.
yeah, when I did it.
Yeah. So you drop that in there, sort of world record. So what can top that, Marcus? Because I'm suspecting that you don't just stop there. And I know you're very passionate about your charity work as well. What is next for somebody who's done something as challenging as that?
It's a good question, and one of the things I've been facing, so I'm no spring chicken, Jeremy. You might have noticed I'm 54 years old now, and you know, a career in rugby does take its toll on you. And I've had now a knee replacement. I think in order to do the row, I had to have quite a lot of work done to my feet because they weren't straight and had to be straight and to be able to push on the plate. So I had about 17 titanium screws put in my foot, which now makes ultra marathons really quite painful. I've also got a metal plate in my head. So I need to. I'm no spring chicken. I need to look after myself. But to answer your question, I've entered 3 triathlons for next year. Ironman UK, which was in Bolton, is one of my favourite races. They've moved that to Roundhay, which is probably about 300 yards away from my front door.
How convenient, yeah.
Exactly. So it'd be very rude not to, right? So I've kind of toned down my my activities and trying to go for longevity now rather than impact.
I'm simply amazed by how you described some of those achievements, Marcus. What do you take back into, because I imagine this is a pretty interesting topic for your colleagues, for Leithwaite, for anybody who's associated and comes into contact with you. How are you able to share some of those lessons with colleagues, with organizations? I know you've done talks at the school, for example, in the area. How are you able to share some of those lessons learned and at least allow people into your own ultra endurance world, and how they may be able to utilize it in their own organizations and lives?
Yeah, I think the key is not to push your experience down someone's throat and to offer it when it's wanted. It was a particularly useful. I mean, I won't go into detail, but there were a couple of, I would say, at least 50-50s. I remember when there was a storm in the middle of the Atlantic, and it was one of the worst storms they'd had. I don't know if you remember. It was that year when all the trees were flattened at Kew. So I was in the middle of the Atlantic there. There were waves bigger than skyscrapers that were smashing the span. I had deployed my parachute anchor in the ocean, which is like a big parachute, and it holds your boat in place, stops it being dragged backwards hundreds of miles. Mine had my retrieval line had wrapped around the rudder, so my rudder was flicked on, and my boat was just flipping in this storm, slowly filling up with water. I had to climb out of the boat and cut that loose, put my scrum cap on so I didn't get concussed, and cut. That was a 50-50. That could have gone either way. And when you experience things like that, it was really interesting. Speaking, to some of your ex-military guests on when they've seen life and death situations, you see life differently, and you don't take yourself too seriously, and B, look, do you know what? This is just a business problem that we need to solve. No one's going to die here. And it was really useful during COVID because I remember having come straight back off the Atlantic. I started a new business, and we were looking to grow that business with a view to an exit to private equity. And within 2 weeks of joining, we went into lockdown, and it was absolute panic, and nobody knew what to do. I was like, "This is how we're going to do this, guys. Look, this isn't this serious. Let's have a plan. Let's work backwards, and let's execute it really, really well." And that's what we did, and it worked brilliantly. So I think going through some of these things and some of these experiences helps you stay calm in a crisis. And I think the ability to stay calm, think sensibly, help others who can't stay calm, and guide them through that process. I think that's invaluable. And I think that's the real value that I bring to a team.
I think that's fantastic advice, Marcus. And what's next for Leithwaite and your role there? I know you're handling some really big appointments at the moment. What's next for yourself at Leithwaite?
Yeah, so I joined 8 months ago. It feels longer, and I love this place. It's a very values-driven business. It's a big firm. It's big boutique. There are 5 big global search firms out there, and everyone else is a boutique. However big they are, they're a boutique compared to these 5 firms. So we're growing the business. We have an event that we're planning ourselves in 2030, and we're building the business up to that. And we're doing some amazing work. I've just finished today, did the Chief Accounting Officer for Bank of America. Really complex role, really complex business. Love solving really complex problems and issues with our clients, and the market's turning. the market's picking up. So it's all looking good, Jeremy. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm really enjoying my time here.
Fantastic. And it would be remiss of me, because you haven't really blown your own trumpet at all, in that you did raise an awful lot of money for your particular charity in crossing the Atlantic, with a cause that's close to both of us. Can you share with our listeners just how much you actually raised for your chosen charity?
That single event was 740,000, which was Macmillan's biggest single ever fundraise. Do you know what the most disappointing thing was, Jeremy? I was due to meet the Queen. She thought that's a really good thing to do, and she wanted to meet me and talk to me about it. And then COVID happened, and then of course she sadly passed away. So that was probably the biggest regret of that, if I'm honest. I didn't manage to chat it through with the Queen.
Yeah, I couldn't resist asking you about it, because I knew you'd answer. But I thought, for our listeners today, crossing the Atlantic in a world record time, having not really been a row before, and raising £750,000 for charity for Macmillan is I'm sure the listeners will forgive me for raising that question. Marcus, I am breathless listening to all of that today. Can I thank you for sharing some of those tales of your not just professional career, but also your mindset into your personal and professional endeavors. I think it's been absolutely fascinating to hear how to approach some of the challenges and obstacles in your way with a really logical and a set of tools that I think we can actually all take bits of away to develop in our own practices, in our own organizations, in our own personal lives as well. So Marcus, thank you so much for sharing that today. Really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to have you on as a guest.
Jeremy, great to see you again. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcus. That's it for Clarendon Chronicles today. Tune in for the next one, and bye for now.